Hola, buenas tardes amigos, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estáis? Soy Plácido, Doménech y hoy tenemos la segunda parte de un Inside X especial que, bueno, como no lo empezamos tarde y no pudimos acabarlo, porque era bastante largo además, tenía 4 contenidos, pues ayer vimos 2 y hoy vamos a ver otros 2. No hace falta que hayáis visto los 2 anteriores, pero bueno. Un Inside X en xHUB.AI, el episodio 2 de 2, repensando la mente en la era de la inteligencia artificial. Y vamos a tener que tener la mente abierta y vamos a tener que tener muchísima paciencia. Bueno, ayer salió Sora 2 junto con el concepto de lo que va a ser una aplicación social de vídeos continuos generados por IA. Va a ser auténticamente apocalíptico, ya os lo advierto. De esto se va a hablar en todos los sitios, en todas las televisiones y periódicos, porque el impacto, la línea entre lo que es real y no es real desaparece. Grandes posibilidades, mucho mayores aún, más facilidad en la creación de contenido, pero también grandes riesgos. Nosotros en xHUB.AI, yo especialmente, siempre hago hincapié en la oportunidad, en el nuevo contexto tecnológico. Ayer lo hablamos con David Peleta, no vamos a poder prohibir. ¿Qué es lo que queremos prohibir? No, es que esto puede afectar y no afecta el programa que vamos a hacer también, xHUB.AI, de fuga de talento. No os podéis imaginar la gente que he hablado esta mañana que se van de España. Yo me lo estoy planteando. La gente se va de España. Y que no me vengan con cuentos con tonterías, de verdad. Tengo poca paciencia y no tengo por qué tener más. Que no me vengan con cuentos y con tonterías de que esto ya ocurría. De verdad, yo no tengo la culpa de que la gente no vea más allá, que si esto es algo que tú ves que... Escucha, que ya soy muy mayor. Para tonterías. Eso sí, de Sora 2 sí que se va a hablar en los telediarios y en las tertulias y hasta el que vende cebollas en la bodega y el que te vende el pan y el frutero, que no pasa nada, todos pueden hablar de ello. Pero del éxodo de talento y lo que va a repercutir en nuestro país, lo que está saliendo y lo que está entrando, de eso no. De eso no hablemos. Hablemos de otras guerras, que también tenemos que hablar, siempre defenderemos la paz, pero no de la guerra social que estamos teniendo. A mí me afecta directamente. Familiares cercanos se van de España. Y me jode profundamente. Pero no solo un familiar cercano, sino gente conocida, de xHUB, amigos. Bueno, hoy ha sido una avalancha, no sé, quizá una señal. Y de ahí que haya decidido hacer ese debate xHUB.AI, fuga de talento en España, ¿no? ¿Qué futuro tiene España? Y bueno, en definitiva, el mundo está cambiando, el mundo está avanzando, en la era de la inteligencia artificial está emergiendo. Y sí, en todo ese proceso de destrucción, de guerra mental, de guerra por la atención, de wow factor, pero también de preocupación, de pensamiento crítico, pues tenemos que obviamente repensar la mente, repensar nuestra esencia, nuestro propósito, nuestra historia. Tengo también que anunciar que he dicho que sí a un debate, espero que no sea un enfrentamiento, bueno, pero de debatir cosas de la inteligencia artificial con otra gente, con unos perfiles respetables. No los conozco personalmente, pero sí es verdad que, bueno, cuando he visto las definiciones de IA que han hecho, bueno, me pensé mucho ir, porque no estoy para perder el tiempo, pero sí que es verdad que es necesario también argumentar, divulgar, generar pensamiento crítico, ¿no? No puedo tampoco dar la espalda a ofrecimientos de este tipo, porque yo creo que forma parte de la labor que realizo. Pero una cosa es realizar la labor y otra cosa es perder el tiempo o bajar ya a un nivel bueno, no lo sé, el nivel. Hoy he estado también hablando con gente de LinkedIn un par y las frases que utilizaban era increíble. El análisis de conceptos de inteligencia artificial. La gente no está preparada para lo que viene. Yo lo he dicho y lo he repetido muchas veces, no se llega a entender todo este proceso, todo este descubrimiento, este hito, este debate que tiene que tenerse. que es un debate de nueva era, pero también un debate humano y, en definitiva, viendo el caos que actualmente impera tanto en nuestro país como en el mundo, sálvese quien pueda. Esto va a convertirse casi en un Vietnam. Preparaos, porque lo que se avecina es incertidumbre y nuevo escenario que no somos capaces de prever. Cuidaos vuestra salud mental, yo también lo intento y lo hago. Vigilad con quién os relacionáis. Aprended, trabajad duro. No os olvidéis de vosotros nunca. Lo más importante sois vosotros, cada persona, conocimiento interior. Da igual que fuera ya un cielo o un infierno, lo importante es aprender de la experiencia que nos ha tocado vivir. Yo creo que una experiencia apasionante, un momento apasionante, pero también un momento muy difícil, muy duro, de destrucción y creación. Y también lo repito, que se dejen los gurús, y los zen y los... vamos, me van a tener que pagar muy caro para entrar a determinados debates, de verdad. Y no los cobro. Pero es que no, lo siento, pero no. Van a salir bufones, medievos, gurús, zens. Aquí vamos a exponer una serie de conocimiento, como hicimos ayer con David Peleta, que fue una excelente xHUB.AI, luego cada cual aborde su evolución, su camino, su búsqueda, como quiera. Vamos a por el programa. Bueno, es el episodio 2, este es el episodio 1, las portadas son muy similares, pero bueno, son diferentes. Ayer hicimos este episodio 1, hoy el episodio 2, y vamos a continuar con los contenidos. En el primer episodio vimos el análisis del TEDx de Blaise, Agüera y Arcas, que tengo que decir que es una de las mejores charlas que he visto. Tal me impactó que, bueno, es alguien que voy a seguir. Seguramente publiquemos alguna charla más suya si hay, y los libros que tiene, dos concretamente, que es la vida, que es la inteligencia. Me faltaría que es la conciencia, también que es el ser humano. Bueno, puede hacer muchas cosas, ¿no? Pero estos dos libros caen seguro. De este autor, de Blaise, Agüera y Arcas, como se pronuncia. Se pronuncia distinto, no lo perdonáis. También vimos un encuentro entre Sam Altman y David Dost, discutiendo sobre la AGI, que por cierto ahí se anotó un tanto para mí Sam Altman con una visión reduccionista del David Dost. Me pareció algo muy preparado y muy artificial. Me esperaba muchísimo más de Dost. Y le contestó muy bien Sam Altman. Sam Altman, que va a convertirse en un meme con lo de Sora 2, porque puedes jugar recreando su imagen de cualquier forma, lugar, estilo, hablando. Bueno, algo espectacular. Lo de Sora 2 es un antes y un después de BO3. Entiendo que después también de Sora 2, yo creo que habrá una respuesta de TikTok, habrá una respuesta de Google, y en definitiva el resultado va a ser que en los vídeos generados van a tener una calidad que no se distinguirá de la realidad, y que será un commodity accesible para personas de cualquier tipo, desde un niño hasta un adulto, en aplicación móvil. Genere usted lo que quiera. Eso va a generar una realidad paralela, ¿no? Si ya vivíamos una distorsión con las redes sociales, con este tipo de tecnologías, pues bueno, va a ser una auténtica locura. Pero bueno, si no pasa nada, la semana que viene generamos un programa. Hacemos un debate sobre ello. Debate también tendremos mañana con lo de Barbie, que sabéis que van a meter ChatGPT en los juguetes de Mattel. Y esta tarde también tenemos una xHUB.AI, ¿vale? Y bueno, como ya vimos estos dos contenidos en el primer episodio, en este Inside X vamos a ver una entrevista a Ilya Sutskever, que es de hace un año, pero que cobra importancia porque habla una serie de cosas que son importantes, porque en el Discord hay muchas dudas, mucha preocupación, también en las redes, sobre superinteligencia, sobre alineamiento, sobre muchos conceptos que en esta entrevista concretamente Ilya Sutskever habla hace un año, no tanto, y me ha parecido importante recuperarla para generar un contexto a un último programa que haremos, bueno, último programa de este quizá serie, hablando de la extinción, ¿no?, del ser humano, si es la superinteligencia hablamos de extinción o futuro, ¿no? Y luego, después del análisis de la entrevista de siempre recomendable Ilya Sutskever, que se prodiga poco, pondremos una charla pequeñita, corta, de qué es la mente por parte del maestro espiritual, el maestro, este sí que es un maestro, Jiddu Krisnamurti. Yo creo que es momento de palabras, pero también de muchos silencios. Yo no quiero hablar de mí, yo creo que hablo bastante. Tengo que decir, bueno, que recibí un montón de felicitaciones ayer por mi cumpleaños, súper contento, la verdad, una locura. Y luego también un montón de felicitaciones y comentarios positivos de todo lo que hago, ¿no? Tengo que deciros que me alegra un montón cuando alguien me dice se ha quedado impactado, que nadie como yo en integrar una visión técnica y a la vez filosófica, humanista. Bueno, tengo que deciros que sí, que me alegra. Como siempre digo, no tengo abuelas y se agradece, pero bueno, yo no vivo nunca he vivido de la complacencia ajena. Hay mucho trabajo por hacer, vivimos momentos complicados y asumo asumo una responsabilidad conmigo mismo y también con el mundo para intentar que sea mejor. Creo que xHUB.AI juega un papel importante ante tantísimo ruido, ante tantísimo plástico y circo alrededor de la inteligencia artificial. Así que, dicho lo cual, vamos a ello. 4 cositas. Dirige y presenta a vuestro amigo Plácido, Doménech, Espí. Gracias por acompañarme, gracias por acompañarnos. Un programa más, el 203 o 4, por cierto. Luego, cuando acabe el programa, publicaremos los 2 podcasts de ayer. Este es un programa de la comunidad de Inteligencia Artificial y Ciencias transversales de habla hispana, xHUB.AI, 5ª temporada, 5º año. Lo dicho, más de 200 programas. Yo creo que en la temporada 6 no esperéis tanto contenido. Bueno, sí, 8 por Sora 2. Bueno, sí, es tan fiel. Veremos qué hacemos, ¿no? Muy divertido. El programa está transmitiéndose por X, por YouTube, por LinkedIn, por Rumble, por Kik y por Twitch. Si os gusta lo que conocéis de xHUB.AI o lo que vais a ver o habéis visto, poner me gusta, compartirlo con familiares, amigos, novio, novia. Comentad, suscribíos a YouTube o a cualquier plataforma de podcast. Pero bueno, lo que principalmente nos gusta es que nos sigáis, pero sobre todo que comentéis qué os ha parecido el contenido, ¿no? Y si queréis uniros a la comunidad de Discord de xHUB.AI, me podéis enviar un mensaje directo por redes sociales o un correo y os paso un enlace y entráis todos los recursos de forma gratuita. Y si queréis apoyar económicamente, podéis hacer un Buy Me a Coffee, podéis hacer un PayPal o podéis hacer un super chat en YouTube. En definitiva, apoyar todo lo que estamos haciendo. Vamos a ver el análisis de la entrevista de Ilya Sutskever. Vamos a por ello. Venga, vamos a buscar un momentín el enlace que no lo tenía preparado. Y vamos a por ello. Bueno, ya sabéis que los Inside X, además, pues todo lo que pongáis por el chat, siempre con educación y respeto, lo voy a contestar. Ayer hubo una cosa que no me gustó, pero nada personal. No te reto, a mí no me tenéis que retar. Yo creo que ya hago una labor importante. Puedo incluso invitar a quien quiera autoinvitarse, bueno, que me pase el perfil. Aquí tampoco va a venir cualquiera. Pero bueno, hemos traído a veces a gente simplemente que eran seguidores, pero bueno, aquí siempre que vengáis con respeto, que haya un perfil relacionado con la inteligencia artificial y con la formación alrededor de todo lo que es el mundo de la inteligencia artificial, podemos invitar a gente, ¿no? Pero nunca buscando el enfrentamiento, siempre buscando aprender, ¿no? Porque si buscáis el enfrentamiento conmigo, tenéis complicado. Lo tenéis complicado. Directo, vamos a... Lo tenéis complicado porque no va a haber, vamos. Y si lo hubiera, pues también lo tendríais difícil. Vamos a por ello. Vamos a poner un segundo, subtítulos. A ver si puede en español, porque no siempre se puede. Un segundo. ¿Por qué? Un segundo. ¿Verdad? A ver.
OpenAI, a company that we all know now, but only a year ago was 100 people, is changing the world. Their research is leading the charge to AGI. Since ChatGPT captured consumer attention last November, they show no signs of slowing down. This week, Elad and I sit down with Ilya Sutskever, co-founder and chief scientist at OpenAI, to discuss the state of AI research, where we'll hit limits, the future of AGI, and what it's going to take to reach super alignment. Ilya, welcome to No Priors.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Let's start at the beginning. Pre-AlexNet, nothing in deep learning was really working. And then given that environment, you guys took a very unique bet. What motivated you to go in this direction?
Indeed, in those dark ages, AI was not an area where people had hope and people were not accustomed to any kind of success at all. And because there hasn't been any success, there was a lot of debate, and there were different schools of thoughts that had different arguments about how machine learning and AI should be. And you had people who were into knowledge representation from a good old-fashioned AI. You had people who were Bayesians, and they liked Bayesian non-parametric methods. You had people who liked graphical models, and you had the people who liked neural networks. Those people were marginalized because neural networks did not have the property that you can't prove math theorems about them. If you can't prove theorems about something, it means that your research isn't good. That's how it has been. But the reason why I gravitated to neural networks from the beginning is because it felt like those are small little brains. And who cares if you can't prove any theorems about them? Because we are training small little brains, and maybe they'll do something one day. And the reason that we were able to do AlexNet when we did is because a combination of three factors. The first factor is that this was shortly after GPUs started to be used in machine learning. People kind of had an intuition that that's a good thing to do, but it wasn't like today where people exactly knew what they need GPUs for. It was like, oh, let's play with those cool, fast computers and see what we can do with them. It was an especially good fit for neural networks, so that definitely helped us. I was very fortunate in that I was able to realize that the reason neural networks of the time weren't good is because they were too small. So if you try to solve a vision task with a neural network which has 1,000 neurons, what can it do? It can't do anything. It doesn't matter how good your learning is and everything else. But if you have a much larger neural network, you'll do something unprecedented.
What gave you the intuition to think that that was the case? Because I think at the time it was reasonably contrarian to think that, despite, to your point, a lot of the human brain in some sense works that way, or different, biological neural circuits. But I'm just curious, what gave you that intuition early on to think that this was a good direction?
I think, looking at the brain, and specifically all those things follow very easily if you allow yourself to accept the idea. Right now, this idea is reasonably well accepted. Back then, people still talked about it, but they haven't really accepted it or internalized. The idea that maybe an artificial neuron, in some sense, is not that different from a biological neuron. So now, whatever you imagine animals do with their brains, you could perhaps assemble some artificial neural network of similar size. Maybe if you train it, it will do something similar. So that leads you to start to imagine, you almost imagine the computation being done by the neural network. You can almost think if you have a high resolution image and you have one neuron for a large group of pixels, what can the neuron do? It's just not much it can do. But if you have a lot of neurons, then they can actually do something and compute something. So I think it was it was considerations like this, plus a technical realization. The technical realization is that if you have a large training set that specifies the behavior of the neural network, and the training set is large enough such that it can constrain the large neural network sufficiently, and furthermore, if you have the algorithm to find that neural network, because what we do is that we turn the training set into a neural network which satisfies a training set. Neural network training can almost be seen as solving a neural equation. Solving a neural equation where every data point is an equation and every parameter is a variable. And so it was multiple things. The realization that a bigger neural network could do something unprecedented. The realization that if you have a large data set, together with the compute to solve the neural equation, that's what gradient descent comes in. But it's not gradient descent. Gradient descent was around for a long time. It was certain technical insights about how to make it work. Because back then the prevailing belief was, well, you can't train those neural nets anything, it's all hopeless. So it wasn't just about the size, it was about, even if someone did think, gosh, it would be cool to train a big neural net, they didn't have the technical ability to turn this idea into reality. You needed not only to code the neural net, you need to do a bunch of things right, and only then it will work. And then another fortunate thing is that the person with whom I work with, Alex Krzyzewski, he just discovered that he really loves GPUs, and he was perhaps one of the first person who really mastered writing really performant code for the GPUs, and that's why we were able to squeeze a lot of performance out of 2 GPUs and do something and produce something unprecedented. So to sum up, it was multiple things. The idea that a big neural network, in this case a vision neural network, a convolutional neural network with many layers, one that's much, much bigger than anything that's ever been done before, could do something very unprecedented because the brain can see, and the brain is a large neural network. And we can see quickly, so our neurons don't have a lot of time. Then the compute needed, the technical know-how that in fact we can train such neural networks. And it was not at all widely distributed. Most people in machine learning would not have been able to train such a neural network even if they wanted to.
Did you guys have any...
Bueno, aquí he estado hablando, voy a ir, para no ver toda la conversación, voy a ir como a trozos, porque así yo creo que explicamos cosas más contextualizadas a lo que él va contestando. Ha estado hablando sobre la historia del AlexNet. Sabéis que fue un hito en esos momentos de Dark Ages, épocas oscuras de la IA, donde no todo el mundo tenía esperanza y donde había grandes debates de cómo afrontar o cómo debería ser la representación de conocimiento, como él comenta, ¿no? En definitiva, él apostó de forma intuitiva por las redes neuronales, lo ve y lo sigue viendo como un cerebro, un pequeño cerebro, un cerebro digital, ya lo dijo en esa charla de TEDx, una combinación de varias cosas para que se diera ese éxito de AlexNet, GPUs con capacidad de cómputo, aceptar evidentemente que las redes neuronales son una simulación o una modelización equivalente o aproximada de lo que son las biológicas y, bueno, evidentemente una cantidad suficientemente grande de datos, pero además crear y saber crear una red neuronal que satisfaga esa cantidad de datos donde evidentemente cada dato, cada variable es una ecuación, una neural equation, como dice Ilya Sutskever. Y bueno, el éxito de mezclarse, nunca me acuerdo, AlexNet, a ver, el compañero que dice que no, es así, Alex Krzyzewski, porque AlexNet fue desarrollado por Alex Krzyzewski, Ilya Sutskever y Geoffrey Hinton, y Alex Krzyzewski jugó un papel fundamental por el tema del desarrollo de código optimizado en las GPUs, paralelización, etcétera. Entonces fue una suerte que, bueno, tenían unos recursos concretos, pero además al poder contar con el conocimiento de Alex Krzyzewski, pues obviamente eso les hizo conseguir un rendimiento pues nunca visto anteriormente, ¿no? Una combinación de cosas, como hemos dicho, que, bueno, ha pasado a la historia de la inteligencia artificial.
Like particular goal from a size perspective, or was it just as you know, and if that's biologically inspired or where that number comes from, or just as large as we can go?
Definitely as large as we can go. Because keep in mind, I mean, we had a certain amount of compute which we could usefully consume, and then what can it do?
Maybe if we think about just like the origin of OpenAI and the goals of the organization, like what was the original goal and how's that evolved over time?
The goal did not evolve over time. The tactic evolved over time. So the goal of OpenAI from the very beginning has been to make sure that artificial general intelligence, by which we mean autonomous systems, AI, that can actually do most of the jobs and activities and tasks that people do, benefits all of humanity. That was the goal from the beginning. The initial thinking has been that maybe the best way to do it is by just open sourcing a lot of technology. We later, and we also attempted to do it as a nonprofit. It seemed very sensible. This is the goal. Nonprofit is the way to do it. What changed? At some point at OpenAI, we realized, and we were perhaps among the earliest to realize that to make progress in AI for real, you need a lot of compute. Now, what does a lot mean? The appetite for compute is truly endless, as now clearly seen, but we realized that we will need a lot. And a nonprofit wouldn't be the way to get there. Wouldn't be able to build a large cluster with a nonprofit. That's why we converted into this unusual structure called cap profit. And to my knowledge, we are the only cap profit company in the world. But the idea is that investors put in some money, but even if the company does incredibly well, they don't get more than some multiplier on top of their original investment. And the reason to do this, the reason why that makes sense, there are arguments, one could make arguments against it as well, but the argument for it is that if you believe that the technology that we are building, AGI, could potentially be so capable as to do every single task that people do, does it mean that it might unemploy everyone? Well, I don't know, but it's not impossible. And if that's the case, it makes sense. It will make a lot of sense if the company that builds such a technology would not be able to make would not be incentivized rather to make infinite profits. I don't know if it will literally play out this way because of competition in AI. So there will be multiple companies, and I think that will have some unforeseen implications on the argument which I'm making, but that was the thinking.
I remember visiting the offices.
Vamos a analizar este otro trocito poco a poco, así no se hace tan... Bueno, aquí habla de... Le preguntan siempre, contra más largo mejor, ¿no? Siempre contra más capacidad de datos, más datos con más grande, mejor, ¿no? Él dice que sí, que es el camino, scale up, ¿no? Habla de la AGI, fijaos, de la AGI como un sistema autónomo. Ayer hablábamos, la portada era IA autónoma, Mazinger Z lo conducía un humano. Y ahí había un debate con el que yo pues, comparto cosas, pero esa visión reduccionista de que la IA va a estar dependiente siempre del humano, yo no lo veo, no lo acabo de ver. Creo que es mucho más y la creación o llegar al hito del desarrollo de una AGI implica autonomía. Implica que pueda desarrollar cualquier tarea o capacidad humana. Al menos en cuanto a desarrollo de tareas como las conocemos. Si vamos al tema cognitivo, al tema de conciencia, bueno, podríamos tener otro debate, ¿no? Hablan también del desarrollo o la evolución de OpenAI, donde empezaron planteándolo como open source, pero luego y como non-profit, o sin ánimo de lucro, pero sabiendo además que todo este desarrollo de una AGI debería ser para el beneficio de la humanidad. Entonces, bueno, vamos a hacerlo open source, vamos a hacerlo sin ánimo de lucro, pero se dieron cuenta que necesitaba mucha capacidad de cómputo y entonces, bueno, vieron que con el non-profit no podía ser y bueno, no lo vamos a creer todo eso, pero bueno, en definitiva, ese cambio o esa estrategia de OpenAI que está saliéndoles bien, pues les ha permitido tener esa capacidad de computación para desarrollar y competir pues, con Google y con otras empresas, ¿no? Habla del impacto en el trabajo, fíjate, que la AGI generará desempleo en todos, ¿no? Bueno, hay que reflexionar sobre esto, pero posible es. Posible es, ¿no? Entonces, claro, ¿cómo se va a abordar esto? Van a haber varias, múltiples empresas. ¿Qué tipo de implicaciones habrá, no? Bueno, lo vamos a ir viendo, ¿no? Vamos a ir viendo. Vamos a ver, vamos a seguir viendo otro fragmento.
Back when you were, I think, housed at YC or something, or, you know, cohabited some space there. And at the time, there was a suite of different efforts. There was robotic arms that were being manipulated. And then there was, you know, some video game related work, which was really cutting edge. How did you think about how the research agenda evolved and what really drove it down this path of transformer-based models and other forms of learning?
So our thinking has been evolving over the years from when we started OpenAI. In the first year, we indeed did some of the more conventional machine learning work. By conventional machine learning work, I mean, because the world has changed so much, a lot of things which were known to everyone in 2016 or 2017 are completely and utterly forgotten. It's like the Stone Age almost. So in that Stone Age, the world of machine learning looked very different. It was dramatically more academic. The goals, values, and objectives were much more academic. They were about discovering small bits of knowledge and sharing them with the other researchers and getting scientific recognition as a result. And it's a very valid goal, and it's very understandable. I've been doing AI for 20 years now. More than half of my time that I spent in AI was in that framework. And so what do? You write papers, you share your small discoveries. 2 realizations. The first realization is, just at a high level, it doesn't seem like it's the way to go for a dramatic impact. And why is that? Because if you imagine how an AGI should look like, it has to be some kind of a big engineering project that's using a lot of compute, right? Even if you don't know how to build it, what that should look like, you know that this is the ideal you want to strive towards. So you want to somehow move towards larger projects as opposed to small projects. So while we attempted a first large project where we trained a neural network to play a real-time strategy game as well as the best humans. It's the Dota 2 project, and it was driven by 2 people, Jakub Pachotsky and Greg Brockman. They really drove this project and made it a success. And this was our first attempt at a large project. But it wasn't quite the right formula for us because the neural networks were a little bit too small. It was just a narrow domain, just a game. I mean, it's cool to play a game. They kept looking. And at some point we realized that, hey, if you train a large neural network, a very, very large transformer, to predict text better and better, something very surprising will happen. This realization also arrived a little bit gradually. We were exploring generative models. We were exploring ideas around next word prediction. Those are ideas also related to compression. We were exploring them. The transformer came out. We got really excited. We were like, this is the greatest thing. We're going to do transformers now. It's clearly superior than anything else before it. We started doing transformers. We did GPT-1. GPT-1 started to show very interesting signs of life. And that led us to doing GPT-2. And then ultimately GPT-3. GPT-3 really opened everyone else's eyes as well to, hey, this thing has a lot of traction. There is one specific formula right now that everyone is doing. And this formula is train a larger and larger transformer on more and more data.
I mean, for me, the big wake-up moment, to your point, was GPT-2 to GPT-3 transition, where you saw such a big step function and capabilities. And then obviously with 4, OpenAI has published some really interesting research around some of the different domains of knowledge or domains of expertise or chain of thought or other things that the models can suddenly do in an emergent form. What was the most surprising thing for you in terms of emergent behavior in these models over time?
You know, it's very hard to answer that question. It's very hard to answer because I'm too close and I've seen it progress every step of the way. So as much as I'd like, I find it very hard to answer that question. I think if I had to pick one, I think maybe the most surprising thing for me is the whole thing works at all, you know? It's hard. I'm not sure I know how to convey this, what I have in mind here, because if you see a lot of neural networks do amazing things, well, obviously neural networks is the thing that works. But I have witnessed personally what it's like to be in a world for many years where the neural networks don't work at all. And then to contrast that to where we are today, just the fact that they work and they do these amazing things. I think maybe the most surprising, if I had to pick one, it would be the fact that when I speak to it, I feel understood.
Yeah, there's a really good saying from, I'm trying to remember, maybe it's Arthur Clarke or one of the sci-fi authors, which is effectively, it says, advanced technology is sometimes indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah, I'm fully in this camp.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely feels like there's some magical moments with some of these models now.
Is there a way?
Bueno, aquí el creador, el que ha vivido de cerca el desarrollo de todo esto, pues nos explica pues cómo esa arquitectura Transformers, esa arquitectura para aprender, pues que es el final, pues evidentemente ellos partieron de lo que él llama la edad de piedra, donde todo era mucho más académico, pequeño, colaborativo, con investigadores, etc. En definitiva, llevaron al límite la arquitectura Transformers, la capacidad de predecir el texto, la siguiente palabra. No solo esto, además, lo sigue diciendo conceptos como compresión, emergencia, propiedades emergentes, aquí también se ha comentado, ¿no? Pero en definitiva era coger la arquitectura Transformers y poniéndole contra más datos mejor. Y ahí se vio un salto o una evolución emergente de GPT-2 a GPT-3. Hablan de una especie de chain of thought emergente y no lo han profundizado. Y básicamente es lo que se sorprende o lo que recuerda o quiere explicar viviendo el proceso desde dentro, ¿no? Nosotros lo hemos vivido desde fuera, mucha gente lo habrá vivido también desde dentro, habrá gente que nos pueda estar escuchando, pero desde diferentes puntos de vista o conocimiento, una persona en la primera línea lo que dice es que lo que les sorprendió fue que funcionara, porque al principio no funcionaba. Entonces llegó un punto que sí que funcionó y empezó a hacer cosas tan maravillosas, y una de ellas, bueno, dice el entrevistador, fue ese momento mágico, ¿no?, de Arthur C. Clarke, donde la tecnología no se distingue de la magia, ¿no? Aquello ya que no sabemos interpretar o explicar nos parece magia, y fue realmente, como dice Ilya Sutskever, la capacidad o la sensación de que te entendía, y es así. No digo que lo haga, no vamos a entrar en ese debate ahora, sino es la primera vez que teníamos la sensación que cuando estabas delante de una inteligencia artificial con ChatGPT, GPT 3.5, luego vino el 4, etcétera, todo lo que conocemos, pues esa sensación de, bueno, esto mejor falla, pero a un nivel me entiende, ¿no? Como que pasa el test de Turing, ¿no? Y bueno, pues eso, momento mágico, ¿no? Interesante la charla, como lo son siempre.
That you guys decide internally, given all of the different capabilities you could pursue, how to continually choose the set of big projects. You've sort of described that centralization and committing to certain research directions at scale is really important to OpenAI's success. Given the breadth of opportunity now, like, what's the process for deciding what's worth working on?
I mean, I think there is some combination of bottom-up and top-down, where we have some top-down ideas that we believe should work, but we're not 100% sure. So we need to have good top-down ideas, and there is a lot of bottom-up exploration guided by those top-down ideas as well. And their combination is what informs us as to what to do next.
And if you think about those either direction, top-down or bottom-up ideas, clearly we have this dominant continue to scale transformers direction. Do you explore additional architectural directions, or is that just not relevant?
It's certainly possible that various improvements can be found. I think improvements can be found in all kinds of places, both small improvements and large improvements. I think the way to think about it is that while the current thing that's being done keeps getting better as you keep on increasing the amount of compute and data that you put into it. So we have that property. The bigger you make it, the better it gets. It is also the property that different things get better by different amount as you keep on improving, as you keep on scaling them up. So not only you want to, of course, scale up what we are doing, we also want to keep scaling up the best thing possible.
What is you probably don't need to predict because you can see internally. What do you think is improving most from a capability perspective in the current generation of scale?
The best way for me to answer this question would be to point to the models that are publicly available. And you can see how they compare from this year to last year. And the difference is quite significant. I'm not talking about the difference between, not only the difference between, let's say you can look at the difference between GPT-3 and GPT 3.5, and then ChatGPT, ChatGPT-4, ChatGPT-4 with vision, and you can just see for yourself. It's easy to forget where things used to be, but certainly the big way in which things are changing is that these models become more and more reliable. Before, they were only very partly there. Right now, they are mostly there, but there are still gaps. And in the future, perhaps, these models will be there even more. You could trust their answers. They'll be more reliable. They'll be able to do more tasks in general across the board. And then another thing that they will do is that they'll have deeper insight. As we train them, they gain more and more insight into the true nature of the human world. And their insight will continue to deepen.
I was just going to ask about how that relates to sort of model scale over time, because a lot of people are really stricken by the capabilities of the very large scale models and the emergent behavior in terms of understanding of the world. And then in parallel, as people incorporate some of these things into products, which is a very different type of path, they often start worrying about inference costs going up with the scale of the model, and therefore they're looking for smaller models that are fine-tuned. But then, of course, you may lose some of the capabilities around some of the insights and ability to reason. And so I was curious in your thinking in terms of how all this evolves over the coming years.
I would actually point out that the main thing that's lost when you switch to the smaller models is reliability. I would argue that at this point, it is reliability that's the biggest bottleneck to these models being truly useful.
How are you defining reliability?
So it's like when you ask it a question that's not much harder than other questions that the model succeeds at, then you'll have a very high degree of confidence that it will continue to succeed. So I'll give you an example. Let's suppose that I want to learn about some historical thing. And I can ask, well, tell me what is the prevailing opinion about this and about that, and I can keep asking questions. And let's suppose it answered 20 of my questions correctly. I really don't want the 21st question to have a gross mistake. That's what I mean by reliability. Or like, let's suppose I upload some documents, some financial documents. Suppose they say something, I want you to do some analysis and to make some conclusion, and I want to take action on this basis and this conclusion. And it's like, it's not a super hard task. And these models clearly succeed on this task most of the time. But because they don't succeed all the time, and if it's a consequential decision, I actually can't trust the model any of those times. And I have to verify the answer somehow. So that's how I define reliability. It's very similar to the self-driving situation, right? If you have a self-driving car and it's like, does things mostly well, that's not good enough. Situation is not as extreme as with a self-driving car, but that's what I mean by reliability.
My perception of reliability is that to your point, it goes up with model scale, but also it goes up if you fine tune for specific use cases or instances or data sets. And so there is that trade-off in terms of size versus specialized fine tuning versus reliability.
So certainly people who care about some specific application have every incentive to get the smallest model working well enough. I think that's true. It's undeniable. I think anyone who cares about a specific application will want the smallest model for it. That's self-evident. I do think, though, that as models continue to get larger and better, then they will unlock new and unprecedentedly valuable applications. So yeah, the small models will have their niche for the less interesting applications, which are still very useful. And then the bigger models will be delivering on applications. Okay, let's pick an example. Consider the task of producing good legal advice. It's really valuable if you can really trust the answer. Maybe you need a much bigger model for it, but it justifies the cost.
There's been a lot of investment this year at the 7B in particular, but 7B, 13B, 34B sizes. Do you think continued research at those scales is wasted?
No, of course not. I mean, I think that in the kind of medium term by AI timescale anyway, there will be an ecosystem. There will be different uses for different model sizes. There will be plenty of people who are very excited, for whom the best 7B model is good enough. They'll be very happy with it. And then there'll be plenty of very, very exciting and amazing applications for which it won't be enough. I think that's all. I mean, I think the big models will be better than the small models, but not all applications will justify the cost of a large model.
What do you think?
Bueno, muy en la línea, ¿no?, de ese paper de NVIDIA, ¿no? Vamos a hacer un pequeño resumen de lo que ha dicho. Habla de centralización y de escala, ¿no? Un momento en el que OpenAI hizo esa apuesta. Habla de decisiones de diseño, de investigación, de programación, de toma de decisiones de bottom-up y de top-down, ¿no? Ambas, ¿no? En ese sentido que la convergencia de las dos decisiones, las bottom-up y los top-down, convergieron en algo como lo que conocemos, ¿no? Pero en definitiva, la máxima prioridad siempre era hacerlo cada vez más grande, en definitiva, escalarlo, ¿no? Sabéis que si hay una pared, Gary Marcus y algunos medievos, ¿no? Que no significa que no haya un límite y que con todo el factor de escala sea lo único que se necesita para llegar a una inteligencia general o superinteligencia. El mismo Ilya Sutskever niega esto también, ¿no? Pero es lo que dice al final. Yo lo he comentado esto en varios posts en Edit, en alguna gente que veo que dicen auténticas aberraciones o barbaridades. A ver, uno puede cuestionar lo que quiera, pero cuando tú ves el avance año a año, hay un progreso y una evolución inmedible. Entonces, independientemente del fallo, ¿qué es lo que te indica la evolución? No entran, ni siquiera entran a contestar. Cuando ven que no saben qué contestar, bueno, lo miro, bueno, tal. Obvio, no. La gente tiene muy poca autocrítica o dame información para que quiero aprender. No, sale como experto con corbata o sin corbata. Yo, de verdad, yo creo que soy maestro de nada, alumno, y quiero ser un eterno alumno. Puedo entrar a cualquier escenario a divulgar o debatir lo que puedo conocer o creo conocer y expresarlo y debatirlo e intentar construir cosas, porque al final todo eso se traduce en que tú no solo debatas sobre ellos, sino crees cosas, las aterrices, las desarrolles, en definitiva tenga un uso, un impacto real, ¿no? Que no se quede evidentemente ni en el laboratorio, ni en el paper, ni en el debate. Dice que evidentemente a medida que iban haciendo el modelo cada vez más grande, pues iban teniendo un desarrollo de un modelo que tenía mayor conocimiento y más insights, ¿no? Más indicadores y conocimiento de lo que era el mundo de los humanos, ¿no? En definitiva. Hablan también de las propiedades emergentes, algo también bastante novedoso en el desarrollo de la IA, pero importantísimo. Y también todo el tema de hace un análisis de los modelos pequeños, ¿no? Bueno, en definitiva, él dice que tienen su mercado y van a tenerlo, que el factor clave es la reliability, que es, entiendo que la fiabilidad de determinadas cosas, pero bueno, ahí está la verticalización o especialización de un modelo pequeño respecto a uno grande que a lo mejor no compensa, pero bueno, siempre habrá un mercado para el grande y el generalista y uno más, y mercados también para los modelos pequeños. De ahí el tema de Agentic AI con los modelos pequeños, ese paper de NVIDIA, etcétera, ¿no? Bueno, vamos a seguir viendo la entrevista, que está siendo bastante interesante. Vamos a por ello. Un segundo, a ver. Un segundo, vamos a ponerlo. Seguimos.
The role of open sources in this ecosystem?
Well, open source is complicated. I'll describe to you my mental picture. I think that in the near term, open source is just helping companies produce useful. Like, let's see. Why would one want to have an open source, to use an open source model instead of a closed source model that's hosted by some other company? I mean, I think it's very valid to want to be the final decider on the exact way in which you want your model to be used, and for you to make the decision of exactly how you want the model to be used and which use case you wish to support. And I think there's going to be a lot of demand for open source models. And I think there will be quite a few companies that will use them. And I'd imagine that will be the case in the near term. I would say in the long run, I think the situation with open source models will become more complicated. And I'm not sure what the right answer is there. Right now, it's a little bit difficult to imagine. So we need to put our future hat, maybe futurist hat. It's not too hard to get into a sci-fi mode when you remember that we are talking to computers and they understand us. But so far, these models actually not very competent. They can't do tasks at all. I do think that there will come a day where the level of capability of models will be very high. Like in the end of the day, intelligence is power, right? Right now, these models, their main impact, I would say, at least popular impact, has been primarily around entertainment and like simple question answer. So you talk to a model, wow, this is so cool. You produce some images, you had a conversation, maybe you had some question, you got answered. But it's very different from completing some large and complicated task like, what about if you had a model which could autonomously start and build a large tech company? I think if these models were open source, they would have a difficult to predict consequence. Like we are quite far from these models right now. And by quite far, I mean by AI time scale, but still like, this is not what we're talking about. But the day will come when you have models which can do science autonomously, like they'll deliver on big science projects. And it becomes more complicated as to whether it is desirable that models of such power should be open sourced. I think the argument there is a lot less clear-cut, a lot less straightforward compared to the current level models, which are very useful. And I think it's fantastic that the current level models have been built. So like that is maybe I answered a slightly bigger question rather than what is the role of open source models. It's like, what's the deal with open source? And the deal is up to a certain capability. It's great, but not difficult to imagine models sufficiently powerful, which will be built, where it becomes a lot less obvious as to the benefits of their open source.
Is there a signal for you that we've reached that level or that we're approaching it? Like what's the boundary?
So I think figuring out this boundary very well is an urgent research project. I think one of the things that help is that the closed source models are more capable than the open source models. So the closed source models could be studied and so on. And so you'd have some experience with a generation of closed source model. And then you know, like, oh, these models' capabilities, it's fine. There's no big deal there. Then in like a couple of years, the open source models catch up. And maybe a day will come when we're going to say, whoa, like these closed source models, they're getting a little too drastic. And then some other approach is needed.
If we have our, future hat on, maybe let's like think about like a several year timeline. What are the limits you see, if any, in the near term in scaling? Is it like data, token scarcity, cost of compute, architectural issues?
So the most near term limit to scaling is obviously data. This is well known, and some research is required to address it. Without going into the details, I'll just say that the data limit can be overcome and progress will continue.
One question I've heard people debate a little bit is the degree to which the transformer-based models can be applied to sort of the full set of areas that you'd need for AGI. And if you look at the human brain, for example, you do have reasonably specialized systems. They're all neural networks, but you have specialized systems for the visual cortex versus areas of higher thought, areas for empathy, or other sort of aspects of everything from personality to processing. Do you think that the transformer architectures are the main thing that will just keep going and get us there? Or do you think we'll need other architectures over time?
So I understand precisely what you're saying, and I have two answers to this question. The first is that, in my opinion, the best way to think about the question of architecture is not in terms of a binary, is it enough? But how much effort, what will be the cost of using this particular architecture? Like at this point, I don't think anyone doubts that the transformer architecture can do amazing things, but maybe something else, maybe some modification could have some compute efficiency benefits. So it's better to think about it in terms of compute efficiency rather than in terms of can it get there at all? I think at this point, the answer is obviously yes. To the question about, well, what about the human brain and with its brain regions? I actually think that the situation there is subtle and deceptive for the following reasons. So what I believe you alluded to is the fact that the human brain has known regions. It has a speech perception region, it has a speech production region, it has an image region, it has a face region, it has like all these regions. And it looks like it's specialized. But you know what's interesting? Sometimes there are cases where very young children have severe cases of epilepsy at a young age. And the only way they figured out how to treat such children is by removing half of their brain. Because it happens at such a young age, these children grow up to be pretty functional adults. And they have all the same brain regions, but they are somehow compressed onto one hemisphere. So maybe some, information processing efficiency is lost. It's a very traumatic thing to experience, but somehow all these brain regions rearrange themselves. There is another experiment which was done maybe 30 or 40 years ago on ferrets. So the ferret is a small animal. It's a pretty mean experiment. They took the optic nerve of the ferret, which comes from its eye, and attached it to its auditory cortex. So now the inputs from the eye starts to map to the speech processing area of the brain. And then they recorded different neurons after it had a few days of learning to see, and they found neurons in the auditory cortex which were very similar to the visual cortex. Or vice versa. It was either they mapped the eye to the ear, to the auditory cortex, or the ear to the visual cortex. But something like this has happened. These are fairly well-known ideas in AI that the cortex of humans and animals are extremely uniform. And so that further supports you just need one big uniform architecture. That's all you need.
Yeah, in general, it seems like every biological system is reasonably lazy in terms of taking one system and then reproducing it and then reusing it in different ways. And that's true of everything from DNA encoding. There's 20 amino acids in protein sequences. And so everything is made out of the same 20 amino acids on through to your point, sort of how you think about tissue architecture. So it's remarkable that carries over into the digital world as well, depending on the architecture you use.
I mean, the way I see it is that this is an indication that from a technological point of view, we are very much on the right track, because you have all these interesting analogies between human intelligence and biological intelligence and artificial intelligence. We've got artificial neurons, biological neurons, unified brain architecture for biological intelligence, unified neural network architecture for artificial intelligence.
At what point do you think we should start thinking about these systems as digital life?
I can answer that question. I think that will happen when those systems become reliable in such a way as to be very autonomous. Right now, those systems are clearly not autonomous. They're inching there, but they're not. And that makes them a lot less useful too, because you can't ask it, hey, do my homework or do my taxes, or you see what I mean? So the usefulness is greatly limited. As the usefulness increases, they will indeed become more like artificial life, which also makes it more, I would argue, trepidatious, right? If you imagine actual artificial life with brains that are smarter than humans, gosh, that's that seems pretty monumental.
Why is your definition based on autonomy? Because, if you often look at the definition of biological life, it has to do with reproductive capability. Plus, I guess some form of autonomy, right? Like a virus isn't really necessarily considered alive much of the time, right? But a bacteria is. And you could imagine situations where you have symbiotic relationships or other things where something can't really quite function autonomously, but it's still considered a life form. So I'm a little bit curious about autonomy being the definition versus some of these other aspects.
Well, I mean, definitions are chosen for our convenience, and it's a matter of debate. In my opinion, technology already has the reproductive function, right? And if you look at, for example, I don't know if you've seen those images of the evolution of cell phones and then smartphones over the past 25 years. You got this what almost looks like an evolutionary tree, or the evolution of cars over the past century. So technology is already reproducing using the minds of people who copy ideas from previous generation of technology. So I claim that the reproduction is already there. The autonomy piece, I claim, is not. And indeed, I also agree that there is no autonomous reproduction. But that would be can you imagine if you have autonomously reproducing AIs? I actually think that is a pretty traumatic and I would say quite a scary thing if you have an autonomously reproducing AI, if it's also very capable.
Should we talk about
Bueno, aquí he dicho cosas ya potentes, ¿eh? Aquí ya he dicho cosas bastante potentes. Vamos a ello. Vamos a ello. Habla, bueno, Ilya Sutskever no es muy creyente ni defensor del open source. Lo ha demostrado en varias intervenciones que ha tenido, sobre todo en la de Tel Aviv, en Israel. Él sigue diciendo que va a haber una diferenciación clara entre modelos cerrados y open source, donde los modelos cerrados van a tener una gran diferencia respecto a los abiertos. No es lo que estamos viendo tiempo después, ¿no? Estamos viendo que hay, él decía 6 meses de diferencia o 1 año, y no estamos viendo realmente eso, estamos viendo una proximidad importante, pero yo creo que es verdad que a medida que se vaya avanzando, a medida que los modelos de inteligencia artificial cada vez proporcionen, como dice Ilya, poder, los modelos se cerrarán a las grandes compañías y los modelos open source, bueno, serán desarrollados o podrán desarrollarse a un nivel. Ojalá que no sea así, ojalá que sea que tengamos la capacidad de gestionarlo igual que una Big Tech, los mismos modelos o similares, pero va a ser muy complicado, ¿no? Porque él pone un ejemplo, dice, imaginad tener una AGI o un modelo tan potente que fuera capaz de asumir la creación de una Big Tech, ¿no? Claro, si estos modelos tan generalistas y potentes están disponibles de forma totalmente libre y open source, pues eso generaría bastante disrupción, ¿no? Porque no hay un control. Pero entonces lo que quiere decir es que vamos a un mundo de inteligencias artificiales generales, autónomas o no, superinteligencias, pero con un control no proporcionadas por ellas, sino proporcionadas por los humanos que las fabrican, o los que permiten o el poder que permite fabricar esta tecnología a quien lo fabrica, ¿no? Y que luego lo vende, ¿no? Cuidado con esto, ¿no? Entonces quizá es mejor el escenario del open source y no tener un control sobre esta tecnología, pero claro, eso nos llevaría también a un escenario entrópico, caótico, distópico. Bueno, hay que reflexionar sobre ello, ¿no? Donde dice que habla sobre dónde están realmente los límites de escala, ¿no? Del escalado. Habla de los datos, ¿no? Además, en la última charla de Neurips de Ilya Sutskever lo comenta, ¿no? Se acabó prácticamente el fuel de datos. Seguirá habiendo, pero no podemos confiar exclusivamente a la escala a partir de datos, pero bueno, viendo Sora 2, yo creo que ahí saldrá una combinación de mis Hassabis, lo decía, ¿no? Con la integración de memoria, modelos del mundo, componentes especializados. Que yo tengo una visión bastante, yo creo que interesante, que es que esos modelos especializados, como le pregunta el entrevistador, que es como lo tenemos en el cerebro, en el fondo son, como decir, eso es que ver el córtex, algo bastante uniforme. Lo podemos llevar de especialización a uniformidad, y el resultado o la prueba está en la plasticidad del cerebro, ¿no? Y pone varios casos que lo hemos nombrado, no sé exactamente cómo se llama, pero aquí lo dice, ¿no? Cuando te separan las dos partes del cerebro, en casos de epilepsia extrema, como una parte del cerebro consigue adaptarse, aunque pierda capacidades, pero bueno, hay una adaptación en ese sentido, ¿no? También he puesto un ejemplo de un animal que cogen el nervio del ojo y se lo ponen al oído, y ahí hay un mapeo y una adaptación y aparecen neuronas con capacidad o similares a las que se encuentran en un sistema de visión. Bueno, pues eso serían pruebas de la uniformidad, en definitiva, que la arquitectura, aunque podamos concebirla y se estructura el cerebro de esta manera en regiones especializadas, la plasticidad nos da a entender que en definitiva las arquitecturas nos lleva igualmente a decir que hay una uniformidad, y la uniformidad es una red neuronal, ¿no? Como una red de conexiones, como procesos de información que se comunican y a un nivel de un tamaño y complejidad elevada, y también a partir de una configuración expresan una serie de propiedades top emergentes que son con las que nos identificamos, ¿no? Y que quizás ese proceso es el que no somos capaces de procesar o entender, ¿no? Habla de si en ese nivel, bueno, pues podríamos introducir el concepto de vida digital, ¿no? Él dice que sí, que obviamente sí, que esto nos llevaría no solo a inteligencia, sino a vida, pero que debería ser autónoma, ¿no? Es decir, si queremos considerar la digital life, la vida artificial, o digital o sintética, pues tenemos que abordar la autonomía de estas inteligencias artificiales, ¿no? Dice que esto supondría un gran peligro. Dice, imagínate, pues estas inteligencias artificiales caminando entre nosotros, pero siendo más inteligentes que nosotros. Bueno, pues es un peligro, ¿no? Habla de la capacidad reproductiva. Él dice algo que, bueno, se puede coger con pinzas. Dice, no, la tecnología ya la tiene. Tú fíjate, toda la evolución que ha tenido en determinadas tecnologías, esa capacidad reproductiva, la tecnología ya la tiene a través de la mente de las personas. Un pensamiento muy curioso, quizá más profundo de lo que parece, pero no profundiza mucho en él. Pero en definitiva sería un sistema holístico. Lo que pasa es que esa capacidad reproductiva estaría exteriorizada en nosotros. Pero bueno, seríamos una única cosa, ¿no? Y allí habría una simbiosis. Claro, nosotros los separamos, pero quizá somos uno con la inteligencia artificial. Y habla de que bueno, sí que podríamos tener una capacidad reproductora o reproductiva en el tema de la inteligencia artificial general, volveríamos otra vez a la autonomía, pero que bueno, es un escenario, como dice Ilya Sutskever, que asusta bastante, ¿no? Caminaría entre nosotros, serían más inteligentes y además se reproduciría. Bueno, pues seguro que, bueno, esto a nuestro presidente que decía algo no se va a transformar en alguien, en aquel Hispania 2040, que no sabemos nada de él, pues entiendo que sería un escenario distópico o que no sabemos imaginar cómo gestionar o cómo sería, ¿no? Cómo nos veríamos en él.
Superalignment?
Yeah, very much so.
Can you just sort of define it? And then, we were talking about what the boundary is for when you feel we need to begin to worry about these capabilities being in open source. Like, what is superalignment and like why invest in it now?
The answer to your question really depends to where you think AI is headed. If you just try to imagine and look into the future, which is of course a very difficult thing to do, but let's try to do it anyway. Where do we think things will be in 5 years or in 10 years? I mean, progress has been really stunning over the past few years. Maybe it will be a little bit slower. But still, if you extrapolate this kind of progress, we'll be in a very, very different place in 5 years, let alone 10 years. It doesn't seem implausible. It doesn't seem at all implausible that we will have computers, data centers, that are much smarter than people. And by smarter, I don't mean just have more memory or have more knowledge, but I also mean have deeper insight into the same subjects that we people are studying and looking into. It means learn even faster than people. Like, what could such AIs do? I don't know. Certainly, if such an AI were the basis of some artificial life, it would be, well, how do you even think about it if you have some very powerful data center that's also alive, in a sense? That's what we're talking about. And when I imagine this world, my reaction is, gosh, this is very unpredictable what's going to happen. Very unpredictable. But there is a bare minimum which we can articulate. That if such very, very intelligent, super intelligent data centers are being built at all, we want those data centers to hold warm and positive feelings towards people, towards humanity. Because this is going to be non-human life, in a sense. Potentially, it could potentially be that. And so I would want that any instance of such super intelligence to have warm feelings towards humanity. And so this is what we are doing with the Super Alignment Project. We are saying, hey, if you just allow yourself, if you just accept that the progress that we've seen, maybe it will be slower, but it will continue. If you allow yourself that, then you can start doing productive work today to build the science so that we will be able to handle the problem of controlling such future superintelligence, of imprinting onto them a strong desire to be nice and kind to people. Because those data centers, right, they'll be really quite powerful. There'll probably be many of them. The world will be very complicated, but somehow to the extent that they are autonomous, to the extent that they are agents, to the extent they are beings, I want them to be pro-social, pro-human social. That's the goal.
What do you think is the likelihood of that goal? I mean, some of it feels like a outcome you can hopefully affect, right? But are we likely to have pro-social AIs that we are friends with individually or, as a species?
Well, I mean, friends with, I think that part is not necessary. The friendship piece, I think, is optional, but I do think that we want to have very pro-social AI. I think it's possible. I don't think it's guaranteed, but I think it's possible. I think it's going to be possible, and the possibility of that will increase insofar as more and more people allow themselves to look into the future, into the 5 to 10 year future, and just ask yourself, what do you expect AI to be able to do then? How capable do you expect it to be then? And I think that with each passing year, if indeed AI continues to improve, and as people get to experience, because right now we are talking, making arguments, but if you actually get to experience, oh gosh, the AI from last year, which was really helpful, this year it puts the previous one to shame, and you go, okay. And then 1 year later, and 1 year it's starting to do science, the AI software engineer is starting to get really quite good, let's say. I think that will create a lot more desire in people for what you just described, for the future superintelligence to indeed be very pro-social. I think there's going to be a lot of disagreement, it's going to be a lot of political questions, but I think that as people see AI actually getting better, as people experience it, the desire for the pro-social superintelligence, the humanity-loving superintelligence, as much as it can be done, will increase. And on the scientific problem, I think right now it's still being an area where not that many people are working on. Our AIs are getting powerful enough where you can really start studying it productively. We'll have some very exciting research to share soon. But I would say that's the big picture situation here. It really boils down to look at what you've experienced with AI up until now. Ask yourself, is it slowing down? Will it slow down next year? We will see, and we'll experience it again and again. And I think it will keep and what needs to be done will keep becoming clearer.
Do you think we're just on an accelerative path? Because I think fundamentally, if you look at certain technology waves, they tend to inflect and then accelerate versus decelerate. And so it really feels like we're in an acceleration phase right now versus the deceleration phase.
Yeah. I mean, right now, it is indeed the case that we are in an acceleration phase. It's hard to say, multiple forces will come into play. Some forces are accelerating forces and some forces are decelerating. So for example, the cost and scale are a decelerating force. The fact that our data is finite is a decelerating force. To some degree, at least. I don't want to overstate.
Yeah, it's kind of within an asymptote, right? At some point you hit it, but when it's the standard S curve, right, or sigmoidal.
Well, with the data in particular, I just think it just won't be an issue because we'll figure out something else. But then you might argue the size of the engineering project is a decelerating force, just the complexity of management. On the other hand, the amount of investment is an accelerating force. The amount of interest from people, from engineers, scientists is an accelerating force. And I think there is one other accelerating force. And that is the fact that biological evolution has been able to figure it out. And the fact that up until now, progress in AI has had, up until this point, this weird property that it's kind of been, it's been very hard to execute on. But in some sense, it's also been more straightforward than one would have expected, perhaps. In some sense, I don't know much physics, but my understanding is that if you want to make progress in quantum physics or something, you need to be really intelligent and spend many years in grad school studying how these things work. Whereas with AI, you have people come in, get up to speed quickly, start making contributions quickly. It has the flavor is somehow different. Somehow there's a lot of give to this particular area of research. And I think this is also an accelerating force. How will it all play out remains to be seen. Like it may be that somehow the scale required of engineering complexity will start to make it so that the rate of progress will start to slow down. It will still continue, but maybe not as quick as we had before. Or maybe the forces which are coming together to push it will be such that it will be as fast for maybe a few more years before it will start to slow down. If at all, that would be my articulation here.
Ilya, this has been a great conversation.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Find us on Twitter at @NoPriors.
Bueno, vamos a la última parte y daré una opinión general y luego veremos a Ilya y terminaremos, pero bueno, aún nos queda un ratito. Le preguntan del superalineamiento, habla de, evidentemente, algo que pocos hablan, ¿no? Que es la alineación, ¿no? Y cómo conseguir lo que no sabemos. El superalineamiento y, bueno, luego él haría esa empresa, Safe Superintelligence, que dicen muy poco sobre ello, excepto, como comentamos ayer con David Peleta. La propuesta de compra por parte de Meta, por parte de Zuckerberg, rechazo. Solo uno de los directivos y cofundadores se fue a Meta. Y, en definitiva, Ilya Sutskever pasó a ser CEO, creo, y dirigir técnicamente también la compañía, y dice que tiene muy claro lo que tienen que hacer. En definitiva, no sabemos mucho de Ilya y su desarrollo, pero tienen claro que el desarrollo de una superinteligencia segura, donde el superalineamiento es una cualidad vinculada a la seguridad del modelo de la superinteligencia, pues es un requerimiento de lo que están haciendo, ¿no? Él dice igualmente que en 5 o 10 años, independientemente de las aceleraciones o desaceleraciones de varios conceptos o procesos, nos van a llevar a un sitio diferente, ¿no? Y es obvio, lo estamos viendo. Cuando uno piensa en los diferentes años, es como todo evoluciona tan rápido que el año pasado es prehistórico ya. Ya no quiero deciros si nos remontamos a la era inicial de ChatGPT o ya no quiero deciros si nos vamos a anterior, ¿no? Entonces, si esto lo proyectamos de forma más medieval o a ciencia ficción, si nos quedamos en un punto realista, positivo, bueno, vamos, como dice Ilya Sutskever, a un sitio distinto, ¿no? A una realidad y un contexto distinto, que es un poco lo que siempre he comentado. Habla del data center con esas capacidades de cómputo como una entidad viva, ¿no? Porque, claro, no descartando la vida artificial, ¿qué serían estos data centers más que entidades que representarían organismos vivos, ¿no? Ahí hay un debate, ¿vale? Evidentemente hay un debate, pero que ese escenario supone, con un data center, con varios en Estados Unidos o en varias partes del mundo, supone un escenario impredecible, ¿no? Dice que es muy importante que inculquemos en el desarrollo de estas superinteligencias, de estas AGIs también, vibraciones, ¿no? Positivas, sentimientos positivos, intenciones positivas para la humanidad, ¿no? Deseos de ser agradables y amables, ¿no? Con el ser humano. Pero claro, una cosa es el deseo y otra cosa es la obligatoriedad o la imposibilidad de, ¿no? A las leyes de Isaac Asimov de robótica, ¿no? Claro, entonces el alineamiento, que es un deseo y lo dejamos a la superinteligencia a ver qué es lo que desea o en qué deriva, o va a haber un alineamiento férreo y control absoluto. Y si no sabemos un control férreo absoluto, ¿vamos a crearlas? En principio sí. Y ahí está el riesgo, ¿no? Habla de la autonomía, habla del pro-human social, ¿no? O el pro-social superintelligence. Si vamos a tener amigos o nuevas especies. Bueno, aquí no se dice que no lo descarta ni una cosa ni la otra. Habla también de la evolución biológica, el papel o el fin de la evolución biológica sustituida por una evolución dirigida. Habla sobre grandes avances que puedan haber en la física, como quantum physics o computación cuántica, que puedan añadirse a todo este tipo de desarrollo. Y habla en definitiva de que vamos a, lo vuelvo a decir, ¿no? Un nuevo lugar donde, bueno, pueden haber cosas que se aceleren, otras que se desaceleren, pueden haber dificultades, no lo sabemos, no se sabe, pero evidentemente yo creo que es que todo lo que estamos viviendo supera nuestras expectativas, ¿no? Y claro, eso nos lleva por un lado a un hype, por otro lado a un conocimiento, pero es verdad que yo sigo diciéndolo, la IA está under hype y es que no entendemos aún las posibilidades que tenemos con esta tecnología a la hora de poder abordar una transformación de nuestras vidas, que a lo mejor no nos dejan, de ahí el programa este de Éxodo, ¿no? Oye, pues no nos dejan, nos tenemos que ir a donde nos dejen y quizá hayan partes del mundo donde se desarrollen espacios o edenes tecnológicos, edenes donde la era de la inteligencia artificial sea posible, donde sean posibles esos amigos, esas especies, esas AGIs que se reproduzcan. Estoy haciendo casi novela de ciencia ficción también de forma provocativa. Interesante, y sé que son temas que os gustan y os hacen pensar, que a muchos se enervan, a otros os emocionan, a otros os dejan pensativos. Vamos a ver, para terminar, voy a buscarlo porque lo tenía, pero no. Vamos a ver, one second. Un segundo. Vale, vamos a ver qué es la mente de Jiddu Krisnamurti. Que nos explique, a ver, cómo abordamos esto. Vale. Vale. Venga. Vamos a ponerlo. Un segundo. A ver si nos deja este en español y si no, pues nada. Esperaros por aquí. Un segundo. Venga. Vale, vamos a ponerlo ya. Disculpad la tardanza, pero esto de los subtítulos me tiene negro.
What is the mind? Is it ever possible for it to know, to look at itself without the perceiver? It doesn't seem to be so simple as looking at a flower from no center. What is the mind? Is it ever possible for it to look at itself without the perceiver? It doesn't seem to be so simple as looking at a flower from no center, without the center. All right, have you understood the question? Yes? Would you kindly tell me what is the mind and what is the brain? Is the brain the mind or the mind is the brain? That's one question. The other is it possible for the brain, for thought, to see itself in action, in movement? That's the second question. And is it possible ever to observe, to look, to see without the perceiver? Right? Those are the three questions involved in this. Are you interested in this? Don't please me. I'm not. I can get up and go. It won't matter. I hope you're interested in it, or you're concerned about it. Not interest, concerned. Is the mind different from the brain? This is a very important question. We have discussed this matter with several scientists and all the rest of it. The brain is the center for all our nervous responses, right? Is the center of all action and reaction, response and not response. It is the center of fear, of jealousy, hate, violence, sorrow, loneliness, anxiety, depression, sorrow, and so on. It is the center of all movement, right? Of time and thought. Right, sirs? And that brain is conditioned by thought, by fear, by suffering, and also is conditioned by knowledge. Right? Are you following on? So the brain, which has lived on this earth for over 3.5 or 4 million years, not as man, but as an animal, and so on. Only within the last 1,000,000 or 50,000 years, it has become a human being. The brain, which is contained in the human being now. This is what the scientists say, that this brain has existed 8,000 BC. And perhaps even longer. So this brain is conditioned, right? That's a fact. Conditioned by thought, by time. And it can only act in a limited way, partially. Right? If you are specialized as an engineer, for the rest of your life you function in a particular direction. If you are interested in money, it is working in that direction. Right? If you are a scholar, a pundit, then you will gather information and your brain is stuck in that knowledge. So the brain is conditioned by experience, by knowledge, by memory, which is thought, and time. This is an obvious fact. Is the mind within the brain? You understand my question? Huh? Is the mind within the brain or outside the brain? This, I won't go into too long with this because we're not, we cannot have a dialogue about this. I wish we could. You see, sir, is love within the brain? Answer this question. Is love compassion, not sympathy or empathy or tenderness and all that? Love may have all that, but the brain is limited, conditioned. And if love is within the brain, love is then conditioned, limited. Right? And is love limited? is compassion, with its infinite intelligence, is it within the brain or outside it? No, sir, you don't say yes. Please, this is a very serious question. One has to go into it very, very deeply. And you can only, the brain can only find out if it is aware of its own limitation and realizing, being attentive to that limitation, then it becomes utterly free and therefore quiet. Then the mind has possibility of contacting with the brain and not the brain with the mind. I don't know if you understand all this. Are you following a little bit of all this? Huh?
Yes, sir.
Really? Do you know what it means, sir? To understand your own way of daily living and see the truth and the false in your daily living and see how that daily operation, daily existence is conditioned, narrow, limited, based on self-interest. And whether it's possible to be free of that self-interest. And then see what happens. Not imagine what might happen. All that requires either you take many years or you can capture it at one instant. This is a very serious matter. Because the mind is an extraordinary thing if you go in, if it exists at all. That is, if love exists at all. Love is not conditioned. I can love my wife or my father, mother, or my son, and that perfume can be always there. It's not personal.
Calle, bueno, realmente, a ver, tiene más sobre esto, pero me parece que es brillante lo que intenta exponer y cómo. Que nos dejaría una reflexión, ¿no? Y es el amor, ¿no? Porque hablan, en definitiva, Jiddu Krisnamurti aquí nos plantea qué es la mente y le hacen una pregunta que él intenta contestar. Parece que la gente no está muy interesada, pero bueno, él es muy crack, es un auténtico genio y un maestro. Podemos disentir, reflexionar, pero nos invita a mirar dentro, ¿no? A reflexionar profundamente, ¿no? Y habla si podemos ver una flor sin la mente, sin el observador, sin el perceiver, sin el centro, ¿no? Está la mente en el cerebro. Bueno, el cerebro habla de la evolución del cerebro, de la limitación del cerebro por parte del pensamiento, ¿no? El cerebro es limitado. Entonces la mente está dentro, fuera, y habla del amor, ¿no? Habla de la incondicionalidad del amor por encima de, es decir, no está condicionado. El amor o determinadas cualidades vinculadas a lo que serían la mente no están condicionadas, por lo tanto no pueden estar dentro del cerebro. Y yo lo suscribo. Hay determinadas cualidades, variables, que no están condicionadas por nuestra parte local o biológica. Todo lo que no esté en esa localidad, todo lo que sea no local, que influye en lo local, esas son, para mí, estaría la conciencia y la mente sería la parte que integra lo local y lo no local. Para mi forma de entender con las definiciones, como dice Ilya Sutskever, no dejan de ser palabras y términos. Yo creo que se ha entendido muy bien. No quiero que se dogmatice ni lo que yo he dicho ni lo que ha dicho Jiddu Krisnamurti. Tenéis que reflexionar vosotros. Y también llevar a la reflexión de ¿podrán estas superinteligencias amar si realmente lo que estamos creando es un cerebro limitado y condicionado? Y voy a dejarlo ahí. ¿Qué es el amor en la era de la inteligencia artificial? Sería un buen programa. Bueno, amigos, creo que ha estado bien, que hemos contextualizado aún más lo que es la parte de, bueno, repensar, reimaginar nuestra mente, nuestro contexto en todo lo que va a venir, en este caso superinteligencias, y el concepto de mente, concepto de amor, conceptos humanos, conceptos artificiales y naturales o biológicos que se alinean, que hacen, hacen una simbiosis, ¿no? Lo vamos a ver, vivir y lo vamos a elegir en un sentido o en otro, y aquí en xHUB.AI os lo vamos a contar o lo vamos a reflexionar. Gracias por acompañarme. A las 7:30 hay una xTalk.AI. Concretamente, si me dais un segundo, os digo con quién, para los que os pueda interesar. Un segundo, esto no es, me he equivocado. Aquí, vale, un segundo. El programa es Evolución Inevitable, reprogramando nuestro algoritmo de vida en la nueva era de la inteligencia artificial. Y tenemos a Alejandro Medina, que es un speaker de inteligencia artificial en Latinoamérica muy reconocido. Y va a ser un placer tenerlo y hablar de él, de todo el tema de proyectos IA, negocio, impacto, automatizaciones y evidentemente evolución. Os espero a las 7:30. Nos vemos dentro de un ratito. Espero que os haya gustado el programa. Un abrazo.